your mic whenever you're not talking. And welcome to the show. It's Krackle Comics episode 15, and it is retro show number 3, and it's March 1980. I am Mike, joined alongside by
Daniel.
We'll wait for him to turn his mic on.
And I'm Vincent.
That static is going to be the death of us on this show. We're still in quarantine. It's a lovely snowstorm in Pennsylvania now. And
do you have snow there?
Yeah, we got a bunch of snow today.
Oh wow, nothing here.
Yeah, but hey, maybe new comics coming sooner rather than later with DC's announcement today, but we won't know more until later. But Vince, you have a haul segment.
Yes, this was teased last week. I mentioned that I was doing this. Basically, I sent my hunting list of just out of print books, hard to find books, to a couple stores that were promoting that they were doing mail order and that they could appreciate it in this time, when there's no new weekly releases, and some of them they can't even have their doors open because of stay-at-home shutdown orders or whatever. So 3 stores got back to me. One of them I haven't fully gone through yet. They haven't updated me with what they have and what they don't. But 2 stores, they had some things that I wanted. I placed the orders and I received them. Very quick service, very great packaging from both. I don't precisely remember which books are from which, and it really doesn't matter, but I have 5 books total here. First, we have Daredevil, Heart of Darkness Epic Collection. And I think this is my most exciting grab because obviously if you watch the show, you know that the 3 of us are generally superhero fans. And this is really mostly the only mainstream thing that I'm going to show. But this is one of the soon-to-be 3 epic collections covering Ann Nesenti's run on Daredevil with lots of iconic moments like I don't know how to orient things in reverse, with Ultron and Blackheart and a lot of the most famous stuff from the run is in this volume. And the Inhumans also show up, which is kind of sort of picking up from an Inhumans original graphic novel that Ann Nesenti did. But this is probably one of the 2 or 3 hardest to find epics nowadays, which is kind of strange. And the store had it, so I got it for cover price. So not that bad. I was very happy that I got that one. Now there's basically only one more out-of-print epic collection that I need to track down, and that is Thor to Wake the Mangog. To our total of a handful of listeners, if you know where that book is, please hit me up. Then I got 2 out-of-print Disney books. Here is a Don Rosa volume, and here is a Carl Barks volume. I'm almost done Don Rosa. I have all the out-of-print Don Rosa ones, and I just need 2 more total. I think there's 10 of them total. So I've got 8 out of 10. And then Carl Barks, there's going to be so many more than Don Rosa, and I'm less interested because it's older. And so I just need 1 more out-of-print one, and then there's I've established a cutoff point, which I'm not going to bother getting into. And then I got this book. This is Creepy Presents Richard Corbin. So Creepy and Eerie, as well as Vampirella, were Warren Publishing's mostly black and white horror, sci-fi, fantasy anthology magazines from the 70s and 80s. And you had all kinds of creators. They ran a long time. They are all different eras where initially you had a lot of the EC Comics guys doing stories and Archie Goodwin was editing. And then later you had a wave of Spanish artists, and later you had a wave of Filipino artists. For a chunk of time, Louise Simonson was the main editor behind the line. And there are archives for the 3 books. Dark Horse has the Creepy and Eerie lines. Dynamite owns Vampirella, so they published the Vampirella archives. But Dark Horse has put out a few of these creator-focused ones, which are a lot more, especially if you like these creators, a lot more streamlined, way to see some of the biggest hits. This is Richard Corbin, obviously. Corbin has done some mainstream stuff. He did some Hellblazer. He did some Luke Cage. I can't think of what else. I think he had a Batman story in one of the anniversary issues not too long ago. Or no, I think I'm getting it mixed up. But Richard Corbin has one, Bernie Wrightson has one, Steve Ditko has one, Alex Toth has one. Those are the 4 creator-focused ones. And Bernie Wrightson are the hard-to-find ones. And then the weirdest book in the lot, and this is a pretty big book. So this Corbin thing is like, I think this is pretty much an oversized hardcover. Here's the scale for comparison. This is from Fantagraphics. This is Space Hawk by Basil Wolverton. And this is Golden Age superhero comics. And Basil Wolverton just had a very unique, very out of place style. It's both like good, but also like ugly looking. I don't know how to describe it, but I didn't even know the book was that big, but it's a hard to find book and it's some cool comics history. So that's my haul. And I actually I was like, well, I didn't get I didn't check off everything on the list, and I'm still locked in home and all these stores still aren't open, and I'm not going to any cons anytime soon. I'm not going on any road trips anytime soon. So I was like, earlier I basically BCC'd a bunch of shops and was like, all right, let me try this again. So we'll see if I hook any more fish, and I will update if I do and if I receive them. And without further ado, that is my haul segment, which was not 2 minutes, I don't believe.
No, it's like 5.
It never is.
But it was
quality. You get that 2 minutes in.
It was quality content, and now I will leave it to. I'm going to say that I live in Pennsylvania, but like it's a different culture, so I will leave it to the true, different kind of Pennsylvanians to delve into the next issue.
Well, wait. Before Dan starts, I'm the only one with any ties to Pittsburgh, but I've grown up all the time where I'm at, so I never lived in Pittsburgh.
Never been to Pittsburgh.
Yeah, but there's like
more than Vince has because Vince has never gone there.
I mean, well, no, I've been to Pittsburgh, but there are 2 cultures in Pennsylvania. There's Pennsylvania, and then there's Philadelphia.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
And another way to say it,
I would argue there's like 5 subsets, but
another way to say it
is
Philadelphia, aka sophistication, and then and then redneck country.
Wow.
So on that note.
On that note, I'm leaving this. No. All right. So I guess from the rednecker himself, this is Avengers 193, written by David Michelini, with an assist by the Pittsburgh Comics Club. So shout out to them if they still exist. Art by Sal Buscema. So kicking off our show once again is another Avengers issue. This time we're actually jumping 102 issues into the future, where we are reading Avengers 193, like I mentioned. Only 7 issues before the infamous Avengers number 200, where Miss Marvel is pregnant with her son, who actually turns out to be her lover, whatever. It's a whole crazy story that I'm sure we will have the displeasure of talking about later. We'll get to it. Okay. So in this issue, the Avengers find themselves face to face with a villain by the name of Inferno. So from last issue, we have something that, I guess Inferno kind of is, formed. And Inferno is this guy named Joe Conroy, a mill worker who found out about the mill's ties with the Magia, and was killed to cover up the links by the mill owner himself, Vince Peretta. So Conroy was pushed off a catwalk where he was actually holding the Uru, like a piece of Uru that was from Thor's hammer. And the material gave him these powers that made him become Inferno. So we open the issue to some of the Avengers out in Pittsburgh fighting Inferno. And it's Wonder Man and Iron Man. Wonder Man ends up getting the shit beat out of him, and then Iron Man kind of swoops in to save the day. But Inferno kind of escapes and is on this path to get back at the people who try to kill him from the mill. So he actually chases one onto a barge, where the guy from the barge is actually the man that was assigned by Vince Peretta to go knock Joe off of the catwalk to die, pretty much. And this guy ends up dying a pretty vicious death that we actually don't see a lot of, but there is like a panel that implies that he's like chopped up by like the barge, like spinning blade or something, which is crazy. So that's a little dark, I guess, for an Avengers issue. We get some fights with the whole team on a bridge. We get Vision. This era of Avengers is a pretty hard-hitting team. You have all the mainstays and just a lot of iconic characters on the team. I'm not sure if this is before or after the stipulation they had where they went to only 7 team members on a team. I know that was eventually instituted by one of the chairmen. I'm not sure who it was. But yeah, so at the end of the day, Inferno ends up basically escaping, I guess. He goes into the water to basically drown himself. He's not really a villain per se, but he's kind of just like a monster that was created by this Peretta guy who ends up being captured. And fortunately for the Avengers, they were able to record his entire confession. So that was pretty good, I guess. They arrested him. And everything gets tied up into a nice little bow here. So, yeah, that's the Avengers 193. What'd you guys think of it?
Well, we went over it before the show. Only I just read this, so you don't have to say you guys. But it was all right. It was fun. I liked seeing the incorporation of some geographic landmarks, such as like Mount Washington with the Duquesne Incline and Liberty Bridge of Pittsburgh worked in. There's a slight Steelers reference of a guy trying to get to a Steelers game, so I guess this is taking place on a Sunday. So I thought it was fun. It's a little rushed, but it's a nice little 2-part story arc that obviously we read the second part of. And I mean, I am a big fan of the team. It's a pretty fun, interesting team. Beast is prominently on the team at this point, so if everyone forgets that he is actually a long-standing Avenger. But I think Sal Buscema's art's good. This is actually the only appearance of Inferno. There's different Infernos later, but it's not the same guy. But yeah, fun.
Yeah, I was trying to find the issue where the team gets. Oh, that's 181. So that's already happened. The thing that Dan was talking about.
Moving right along into our next book is Batman number 321. And I think last week we had 432. So interesting, you have 321, now 432. Interesting how that worked out. It's Joker's birthday. And I should start off by saying this is Len Wein and Walt Simonson and Dick Giordano. So really kind of a powerhouse team here. Joker's birthday, and he's kidnapping all of his enemies from around town. He's using laughing gas to get Commissioner Gordon. In a flashback, we see him dress up as a woman to lure Robin to kidnap him, and then somehow he gets to the Wayne penthouse and disposes of Selena Kyle, who's there, who I guess is dating Bruce around this time. Batman is living in the Wayne Tower penthouse. He's gone from the mansion at this point. Interesting. I want to note that Dick Grayson is still Robin at this point too. We're only in 1980. Jason Todd won't be around until 1983. So this is, I guess this still falls into that time of not quite New Teen Titans Dick Grayson, but still, he's not hanging out with Batman a lot. But Joker's able to kidnap Alfred there. So he strapped them to his newly built victim go-around and sends out invitation luring people to the Gotham Coliseum for the Harley Quinn Baking Company. Now Batman, working out with his detective skills, deciphers that it's not a real company and goes there to confront the Joker. And he has a giant birthday cake that he was going to serve to everyone in Gotham, but he basically knocks them all out with Joker gas, so it's just them. And Batman has to give himself up to get placed on these giant candles, which are now on top of the cake. But somehow Batman retrofitted his candle to be turned into a giant rocket. And the deal was, of course, that Batman gives himself up. His friends will be let go, but Joker double crosses them. But Batman launches himself on the rocket, and he's able to get out of it. And he throws batarangs to free him of shreds. Robin takes care of like the thugs in the crowd, and Batman chases after the Joker, who gets to a speedboat, and Batman is water skiing on the speedboat to get to the Joker, which the Joker takes the boat and he basically rushes into like a barge, like a shore, and it explodes. And we think, Gordon and Batman think he's dead at the end. I like this. Walt Simonson draws a pretty perfect Batman, especially with the cape. It looks great. The finishes by Giordano are also good. It's not fully Walt's art with Thor yet. You can start seeing it here, but this is really good. Len Wein's Joker is really great. You get a bang flag moment where you think he's going to kill a thug, and it's just a bang flag, and then no, it is an actual gun. It turns out to be a spear gun, and he kills the thug. All good stuff here from a pretty powerhouse DC team. Vince, what did you think of Batman number 321?
I really enjoyed this issue. It's still very Bronze Age-y. I really love this characterization of the Joker, where he questions one of his goons for not laughing at a joke, shoots him, but it's a trick gun, but it's not a trick gun, and he murders the guy. I like that balance more than, just cold-blooded killer, which he sometimes is nowadays. And then, there's funny moments like the car that the Joker drives here. It just looks absolutely bonkers.
Yeah, it's got his full face in front of it.
And then Joker catfishing Dick Grayson, which I can see them still doing that today, but it would be like in this super creepy or like very sinister way. Like they'd try and like homage like It or something, Pennywise. But here it's like comedic. And then water skiing Batman chasing the Joker. It's pretty great. And you see Simonson's style, like as we know it, nowadays and through his whole career, in bits and pieces, but it's not fully. I'm not sure if it's because it's not fully developed, or if it's that he's it's not like fully allowed to be here. If that makes sense. Like as far as this being a very major title, based on the inker that he's working with, etc. Because he's not really. I mean, he's he was acclaimed. Like fans and other creators really liked his stuff going back to early on with the Manhunter feature, which crossed over into Batman, and he actually worked on some Batman issues years before this. But he hasn't gotten to Thor yet. Essentially, well, he hasn't gotten to his second run of Thor. In fact, he was writing and drawing Battlestar Galactica for Marvel at this time, which we chose not to read an issue of that. But this was really enjoyable, and I'll point out anyone looking for it. I mean, this book is probably impossible to find now, but it is in the Batman by Len Wein hardcover, and this is one of the thicker ones too. So definitely worth getting. And then there's enough of like a string of consecutive issues here. Apparently, this book is 600 pages.
Wow. Well, I will note, anytime in comics you have a giant anything is always entertaining. So giant birthday cake, giant typewriter, always a plus for whatever mundane item you can make into a giant crazy, death contraption.
Yeah, see, the trick there is you make your hero shrink, and then everything is always awesome. And so that's why DC should launch an Atom series.
Our next issue is Daredevil 163, written by Roger McKenzie, art by Frank Miller, inks by Klaus Jensen. Matt and Foggy are attending a party with several other key Marvel characters in attendance: J. Jonah Jameson, Tony Stark, Peter Parker, and MJ. When Matt suddenly detects the heartbeat of the Hulk, sending him through the city to find the Beast. Matt finds Hulk and calms him down, resulting in him changing into Bruce Banner. Banner thanks Matt for helping him and travels on a crowded subway and turns back into the Hulk, causing Daredevil to go back into action, this time getting the shit kicked out of him while the Hulk escapes. During the battle, Daredevil tries to reason with the Hulk and have him realize he is Banner. This issue is pretty solid, but you can see that it is only starting to scratch the surface of where Miller would take this book and Daredevil as a character once he is given full writing duties after Mackenzie.
This was good. Vince famously, well, I guess not famously because you didn't hear it, was criticizing me for not liking this era of Daredevil. And fine, you win. You were right. This is actually pretty good. I'm not the biggest fan of the Roger Mackenzie stuff because it is mostly Frank on art. He's not fully writing anything yet, which I think the book becomes exponentially better once he takes over the writing duties. But for the stuff that's going on here, it's really good. You get to see a lot of Frank's art shine, like his use of shadows on the Hulk, for example. A lot of lighting effects as the light's hitting him in different areas, especially with the fighting scenes, which is really where Frank's cutting his teeth with here. But Roger Mackenzie's writing isn't the best, but it is pretty good here. I think this is better than what the Spider-Man issues you read back on Clone Saga were. So this was a lot more solid than what I originally was thinking of giving it credit for. So there, you proved me wrong. But almost good enough that I thought about making this my pick of the week because it was really, really strong, I think, top to bottom.
Yeah, I mean, it's still Frank Miller drawing it. And I mean, there are elements that continue into when he takes over because, I don't know, that's how Marvel Comics worked back then. I do want to point out, so I didn't read this issue for this week. I've read it before at some point. But I want to point out, before we get deeper, is that this is actually the first of 3 Hulk appearances on the show today. And this is the one that takes place chronologically first. But they don't all perfectly line up like that.
And then in DC Comics Presents number 19, it's Dennis O'Neil and Joe Staton. Last week was basically the all Dennis O'Neil show. This time, I think this is his only book, I think, this week. And it's a team up between Superman and Batgirl. And so this is an old prospector finds the house out in the middle of the desert and claims it as his. Just, this house that appears in the middle of anything. So he claims it's his house. And Clark Kent goes there covering it for the planet as its time has moved forward now, and he's throwing this big party. And Barbara Gordon is there on vacation after losing her election to Congress, which is something I'm not even familiar with of her running for office. So interesting to note there for that. So with the people inside of the house basically become increasingly hostile and start going crazy, Superman has to stop a crazy helicopter pilot, and Batgirl has to stop people fighting during the dinner, and it later spills out into a riot. Superman thinks it's coming from this obelisk that's in the main hall, kind of turned into this art gallery, and because his X-ray vision can't see through it, which is the big tip-off. And it turns out this owl-like alien named Dr. Horus lives inside the obelisk and created the house, and he's from a different dimension. So always playing with different dimensions and crazy stuff like that in DC around this time, or I guess really any era. And Superman's able to battle him and pull the Prospector and Batgirl out of the dimension to free the house of its curse. But everyone gets out, but the house is completely swallowed up in this other dimension, so it's gone. And this gives Clark Kent a good story to report on as he gets quotes from Barbara Gordon, and they go on their merry way. And then Dr. Horus is, he's gone along with the house. This is his only appearance. Very, very weird. I was excited to read this of the prospect of a Superman and Batgirl team up with O'Neil writing, but this it's very, very weird and odd. Joe Staton's art is pretty good, though a little rough and muggy throughout, though. Kind of not a great issue, but not terrible.
Yeah, I don't think anyone else read this, but yeah, Earth One, Barbara Gordon, I have no connection. Obviously I didn't read that many Bronze Age Batman comics, let alone backup starring Batgirl growing up. So it's just her whole librarian, congresswoman, and then she was a congresswoman before this. And this is the point where she loses her re-election. And it's just so weird to me. And she's way older than Dick Grayson.
I've only ever been familiar with the fact that she was a librarian. I don't know anything about the Congress thing, but it is interesting to note for all three of us, we're pretty much only familiar with post-crisis Barbara, which is pretty much all Oracle, and then New 52 happens and she's Batgirl again.
Yeah, I mean that's what I say is It's a similar situation as Wally West versus Barry Allen. Like if you grew up reading comics before Crisis, you're a Barry Allen fan, and if you grew up reading comics starting with the New 52 and the CW show, you're a Barry Allen fan. But then there's that huge period in the middle where you're going to be more of a Wally West fan. I mean, this is the generality. And with Barbara Gordon, it's like pre-Crisis, Killing Joke is not a thing. She's Batgirl. She's older. She's totally different. And then post New 52, like those other characters barely exist. But then, if your context is between Crisis and Flashpoint, then it's like you know Barbara Gordon as Batgirl and you respect it, but it's all in retrospect with stuff like Batgirl Year One and things like that. But you know her as Oracle from the Birds of Prey, which again ran like, if you count up both the volumes, like nearly 150 issues.
Right.
And you had other characters as Batgirl, like Cassandra. So yeah, I like pre-Crisis Batgirl, and even Dick Grayson. Like I don't really have that much of a feel for them. Okay, Flash, and kind of accidentally relevant to what I was talking about. So Flash number 283, written by Cary Bates, art by Don Heck. So this is just how I'm going to do issues sometimes on this show. I have more notes kind of about the history than the actual issue, because I think it's worth noting, because I don't know when we'll next read a Bronze Age Flash issue, is that Flash number 200 to 350, 150 issues, 15 years, 1970 to 1985, have never been reprinted in color in any considerable manner. I mean, a random issue that's like a key issue for a certain rogue is in one of the 75 years or the best of the Flash, whatever. They get pulled out, but there's no like chunk. And really the only thing that comes remotely close is you had an abridged version of like the last like third or fourth of that as a Showcase Presents. And then within the past few years, it's interesting to note, in contrast to that the entire Silver Age of Flash has been collected, and most of modern has been comprehensively covered in just the past few years across the Mark Waid run, the Jeff Johns run, and then they're slowly putting a few other things to fill some of the holes. And that's somewhat important to establish because Cary Bates wrote Flash from 209 to 350, almost that entire time. So this really is one of those gargantuan runs. It's 14 years long, and he only has a few artistic collaborators. And also a lot of those artists they were generally like old, like slightly older. If not older, they were like house style type guys. So you had Irv Novick, you had Alex Saviuk, you had Don Heck, and you had Carmine Infantino coming back towards the end on Barry Allen, which he created back in 1956. So that's a long-winded way of saying, obviously there are different eras and there are different artistic runs, but basically any issue from Bronze Age Flash is a great view into almost all of Bronze Age Flash, because it is really a sustained run. And this is the Don Heck period, who Dan is definitely familiar with from early Iron Man and Avengers. And after the Silver Age, he basically got dumped by Marvel. And honestly, a lot of Marvel fans kind of shit talk Don Heck to this day and back then. And this is issue 283. This is a follow-up to 275, which was the death of Iris Allen, so not that long ago. And another connection to the last issue is that when Iris Allen died, she was wearing a Batgirl costume. And Don Heck had a run on the Batgirl backups. And so Barry basically what actually happens in this issue is that Barry discovers that Professor Zoom was the culprit who killed Iris, but then Barry fucking dies. And Zoom is going to hook the whole populace of Earth in this timeline on heroin-laced powdered milk. And just for the fun of it, because crime is like not a thing in his future timeline. So he just wants to commit crimes. And he's also very, very creepily obsessed with Iris, and he wanted her to be with him, but that didn't work out. So he has taken a random woman who vaguely looks like her and is forcing her to have plastic they've knocked her out and drugged her, so she's going to have plastic surgery to look like Iris so that he can forcibly have her. But then Barry pulls off one of the most insane feats I've seen from the Flash, and that's a very high bar actually, where he like reconstituted all of the molecules in his body to survive being exploded and ripped through time. And so he's able to basically beat Professor Zoom. They fight, and then they get on some time travel stuff, and they get fucked over. So Barry jumps out, and there's a cliffhanger for him. But the bigger cliffhanger for Zoom is that he's just going, like, he's like trapped in this time machine going indefinitely back in time to the beginning of time. There's dinosaurs outside and further back. And Zoom doesn't come back for another 50 issues, only for Barry to shortly thereafter kill him in final revenge for killing Iris. And then Iris kind of comes back in the end anyways. But then Barry dies. So like ultimately, Bronze Age Flash is kind of fucked up. But I want to know what you guys thought. Especially, I am interested to see if Dan has any kind of random thoughts on Don Heck.
I'm giving the floor to you, Dan, on this one. I thought I have things to say on it, but I was actually also more awaiting what your reaction was to this.
It was a good issue.
I mean, I was really kind of blown away by it, by how sophisticated the more storytelling aspect was to it. I thought the stakes were really, really high, and then the art was really great and colorful, which is what you want out of a Flash book. But other than that, I thought it was really great.
Which I was slightly surprised to hear. I mean, Mike is somewhat notorious for being a big Barry Allen hater.
I mean, I don't like Barry Allen.
Any further thoughts before we move on?
No.
All right. Incredible Hulk number 245. This is our second appearance of the Hulk, but this is the last one chronologically, I think. This is written by Bill Mantlo, art by Sal Buscema, who we also saw before in the Avengers issue. This is the start of a big run. This is Bill Mantlo's first issue, who goes from here up until 313 when he swaps books with John Byrne. They switch Hulk and Alpha Flight. And Sal has been the main artist on Hulk since 200 and continues through most of this run. So he and then before him was Herb Trimpe, who last episode we read a Herb Trimpe Hulk issue. They are like the two juggernauts of ultimately Silver and Bronze Age Hulk. And the major beats of Mantlo are you have the World Tour arc, which starts after this, and that's pretty self-explanatory. Then he gets pardoned by the government, which is kind of a big status quo deal. He gets stuck in the Crossroads dimension after Secret Wars, which is not worth explaining. And kind of the big character change for this run is that this Bill Mantlo reveals Bruce Banner's childhood abuse from his father, which Peter David will greatly expand on, which, by the way, from the Bill Mantlo point, was controversially plagiarized from an unpublished Barry Windsor Smith project. And I'll also note that only the second half or so of the Bill Mantlo run has been collected, not included in this. I actually really like this Al Milgrom cover. I want to give a shout out to that. It's a very dynamic cover, and I don't, usually consider Al Milgrom a fantastic artist. He's kind of the definition of house style at Marvel in this era. And what's very interesting is that this is the first issue of run, but it actually picks up quite significantly on previous continuity, both stretching back and recent. This issue opens with Hulk. He's trying to find the body of Jarella because even though she died 40 issues ago, just a couple issues ago, he learned that her corpse is being housed at Gamma Base. And basically the whole rest of the issue, he just fights a bunch of Gamma Base soldiers, takes on missiles and stuff. They shoot missiles at him. He balls them up into a metal ball and throws it, which is a really cool thing. It's always cool seeing Hulk doing things like that. Like, in the video games, you always have where he rips a car in half and then uses it as boxing gloves and things like that. Or like rips off a tank turret and then has like a hammer. He just demolishes everyone, as you expect. And then Glenn Talbot shows up in the Supermandroid armor. And he's very mad because he blames Hulk for losing Betty, who he had actually gotten married to. And also General Ross had like a breakdown. He might even be considered dead. I'm not sure at this point. And then also interesting is that we get a ton of recap in this issue. There's an interlude with Rick Jones on the Mike Douglas show, who at one point, not during this era, but before this for a while, recorded in Philly. And Captain Marvel happens to be in the audience, showing up to support his friend. And so Captain Marvel flies off to get in the middle of this fight between Hulk and Glenn Talbot, and that's where the next issue would pick up. So we don't actually get much Captain Marvel. But on the recap account, I mean, I mentioned a lot of the Jarella stuff, and that gets recapped. We get recap of basically Rick Jones' entire continuity. All that said, I mean, it seems like a weird first issue of what will become a long run. And I don't even, on that note, I'm not even sure that I would consider this a jumping on point. But at the same time, it is, because that's how basically all comics in this era were. But I really enjoyed this. There was some nice Hulk action. The art's good. It's pretty much what you'd expect.
I thought it was way too much like punchy, fighty. I was kind of let down by that. I thought there would have been more plot driven to this. I think it was way too much action and less story than I want. Other than like nice art, I didn't really love this. I know the art. I know the writing is definitely more praised down the line than it was, but I didn't think this was a tremendous great start. It is funny though how you mentioned the Hulk video games, because they have the there's a thread on Twitter this week from the Ultimate or Incredible Hulk video game. Apparently you can just pick up citizens in that game and throw them around like nothing, or just like punch them, which is weird that someone figured out, which that's pretty funny. But other than that, I got no other notes on Hulk.
Yeah, Hulk games are cool. I mean, if you set up enough of an environment and give him enough tools to destroy things, you know, it's hard to go wrong. Lots of smashing fun. Ultimate Destruction, and the one of the few MCU tie-in games that's worth checking out. It probably more worth checking out than the movie.
Our Iron Man issue for this week takes us to probably my second favorite run of all time for Iron Man. Iron Man number 132, written by David Michelinie and Bob Layton, with art by Jerry Bingham. Picks up one issue after the memorable Hulk is Where the Heart Is issue, with Banner in restraints and a nuclear device implanted to help keep Banner from changing into the Hulk. Tony Scott Lang and a doctor by the name of Erica Sondheim discuss if the restraints will hold them. This may come as a shocker to all of our listeners, but the restraints do not prevent Banner from changing, and he turns into the Hulk, unleashing havoc on Stark Industries. Iron Man confronts him, losing one of his prized jets in the process. The only way for the destruction to end is for Iron Man to put all of his transistorized power into one punch, basically knocking out the Hulk. A beautiful splash page later, we find Iron Man totally drained on power as he falls right by the giant crater he created. Next issue will involve Scott Lang traveling into Tony's armor to start it back up after he apparently dies or passes out. I really enjoyed this issue, and that's it.
So this takes place, I was wrong. This takes place, no, I was right. This takes place before Hulk, but after Daredevil. So they get all the guest appearances in before the start of the new run. I didn't realize John Romita Jr. was taking a hiatus from this book at the time. I mean, I've read this run, but like, I guess I kind of forgot that. But the look is still held together because Bob Layton was both co-writing the book and also inking the entire time. But I'm not really certain what the deal there was. I'm sure it may have been partially explained in the letters column or something, but in the meantime, like between issues of Iron Man, it's not like he does a major thing. He did some covers and essentially like a fill-in or two. But maybe he was getting a head start on his Amazing Spider-Man run, which briefly he does both at the same time. I don't have that much to add on this issue. I think the previous issue is a lot more memorable and iconic, which we obviously did not read. I thought on the art side, it's cool. I'm going to nerd about Tony Stark's shirt because he's wearing some kind of pattern shirt, which means that the artist, I'm not sure if it was Bingham or it probably actually likely was Layton, used a zipatone, which means, you know, if you're not familiar with comic art, that means it's like an overlay sheet and it's adhesive. And so you put it over the art, you very carefully cut out the shape that you want, and then it's essentially stuck on there. And that's how, and then when they, you know, photograph or scan or however the hell they did that back then, it keeps that texture. And that's how you would do things like, you know, you'll notice that on older comics with like rugs or wallpapers and shirts and things like that. And it's pretty nice, just a dumb thing to pay attention to. And then I found it interesting how one of the soldiers asked Tony, he's like, why don't we just let the Hulk like chill out, like just leave him alone and calm down and he'll turn back into Banner and then we can talk to him. Because that's a question which is very rational. Like people understand how the Hulk works in the Marvel Universe, but you never see that question in a Hulk book, or very, very rarely. But of course it's not applicable here thanks to story. And there's a cool underwater fight here briefly. And also, I really enjoyed the splash page as well. It's a very dynamic. I mean, I would have preferred if Romita drew it, but still.
Did either of you find a big deviation from the art from what would have been a John Romita Jr. drawn issue to this? I thought Bingham was doing a pretty good job of at least making the book look consistent throughout.
Yeah, it's not a huge jump because, you know, Layton is inking both and really held it together in that.
And then I guess next question would be, when does Tony Stark reveal his identity? Because like it's one of those things that's like modern era gets in your head.
It's like 2000.
I at least thought would at least think like during this time, because I know, well, Dan knows more than I do when it comes to Iron Man, but Armor Wars is at least during this time era. It's probably further away than what I think it is, but like I always think that like at least by then people know that he's Iron Man, but I don't think that happens until like maybe the 2000s when he runs for Secretary of Defense. It's
very late. It's around, I think it's around 2004, 2005. It's in the Mike Grell run. So after Busiek, after Joe Quesada.
And is his heart good by this point, or is that also much later as well?
What were you asking?
His heart, like the after in his heart?
I can't really answer that one.
Because I know that gets fixed later eventually too. But no, I thought it was good. But Jonah Hex.
And Armor Wars, I believe, is after this. And I think there's like a one panel thing, which I think is actually a small tease as they move toward that.
Jonah Hex, number 34, Michael Fleischer, Dan Spiegel. It's Christmas in an outlaw town. Note that we're getting a Christmas story in March, so little odd, but Jonah Hex is
it's not March. We are not in March.
Yeah, that's right. Cover date, yeah. So
this is the cover date. So these are actually coming out around Christmas, and there was at least, I don't remember which issue, or maybe last episode we had, no, I think it was this episode. One or two of the issues, the year 1979 is referenced. I forget which ones. I didn't take notes, but you know, that's cover date. So this was probably around Christmas. In fact, I'll figure that out.
All right. Jonah Hex is asked to see if he can bring the killers of the Clarence Dooley to justice, as the Bully Boys gang murdered him before he could make his annual appearance as Santa to the orphanage. Jonah reluctantly agrees. Normally, like, it's a lot easier for him to agree to this than normal it is to get Jonah Hex to do anything. So he agrees to bring him to justice, but he probably can't get the gifts to the nuns that are in the orphanage. But he's able to track them, and he tracks them all the way to this town and gets in kind of like a bar fight with them. and the sheriff of the town comes to break up the bar fight in the saloon. And it turns out that it's his father. And while writing there, Jonah thought back to all the times his father was cruel to him during Christmas, because Jonah's father is a horrible, horrible person. And it turns out Jonah's father's the sheriff of the town, so he takes him and throws him in prison, reveals that he's in cahoots with the bully boys, and they're going to rob a train. So we get this kind of great sequence of Jonah trying to get out of this prison cell by he's trying to throw knives at his father's sheriff's little stooge hand, but the guy just falls out and basically breaks his neck by slipping and falling and hitting his head. And he's able to use his belt to get the keys off him and get out. And eventually, he gets to the train station and stops them and able to give the money to them, and everything's good. The big ending that he forces his father to dress as Santa Claus, because he's big and got a long white beard, to visit the kids as Santa Claus, and then he just kind of leaves them there, and he's like, "Ha ha ha! I've gotten away." A very weird Jonah Hex story, because normally his dad is much more heated exchanges, and I always thought his dad is dead by this point. So I'm wrong here too. It's been a while since I've read any Jonah Hex stuff, but I've always liked Jonah Hex since being exposed to him. But yeah, this was fun. I like Dan Spiegel's art. It's definitely much more kind of a slower read than a more modern book this time. Definitely can see how it's a lot slower paced too. It's kind of hokey, but I'd say not the best issue of Jonah Hex, but it's an all right issue of Jonah Hex.
I thought this was an interesting book to look at, because last week I chose a war book, and here we have a Western book, and those are, this is another genre. I'm not really sure which one is more dead in 2020, even though that there are esteemed creators who occasionally do try their best to bring it back.
So yeah. I'm guessing it's war books.
And Dan Spiegel, we've seen before on the show, I believe. We read a Brave and the Bold issue with a Nemesis backup, and it had to have been Dan Spiegel. He's a really underrated artist. He's mostly known for slightly obscure stuff: Black Hawk, Nemesis, Crossfire. He actually did a handful of issues of Jonah Hex, but it's not like a super long run or anything like that. I was surprised. This is a pretty wholesome story, but I wasn't expecting something grim and gritty. We're not at that point yet. And it seemed like a big deal to me. When it's "Hey, Pa," I was like, whoa, that seems really strange.
Yeah.
It just caught me off guard.
So from All-Star Western and stuff, those get pretty dark. The Hanging Woman is one I always remember. So it's a much more lighter toned. Yeah.
Maybe, and you would know way more than me, but maybe the self-titled series was a little lighter, because All-Star Western, it was still slightly earlier, so you had more diversity in genre, and it was also technically an anthology, so you could have harder hitting things, and then this, maybe they're trying to skew a little bit closer to the mainstream of their comic line. I don't know. That's just crackpot theory. But I looked up, and his father dies on panel in a storyline in the Palmiotti and Gray run, which is in the 2000s and all. But, I have no idea, the actual chronological sequence of Jonah Hex things, because, it's obviously he's not taking place in the same time setting as anything else in the DC universe. But I enjoyed it. Art's pretty good.
Yep.
Anything to add?
Dan, any thoughts?
It was good.
All right.
All right.
Let's move into Justice League of America.
Jerry Conway, Dick Dillon on Justice League of America number 176, The Dream Factories of Dr. Destiny. We open immediately with the JLA sprung into action as Green Lantern is getting the location of Dr. Destiny with his ring. He's basically using a sonar-like device to pinpoint him. And once they figure out his hideout, they go in and destroy Dr. Destiny's death trap machine. But it's actually activated a bunch of other traps hidden across the world. So the team's going to split up into 3 sub-teams and go stop them, because they all have to be turned off at the exact same time, or the world's going to be thrown into a dream dimension and get destroyed. So the stakes are always high with Justice League of America, and all of the machines are based around dreams. So like we get Buddha's enlightenment is one dream. So we get Red Tornado and Zatanna fighting that. Superman and Hawkgirl battle dream demons at a Danish castle from the setting of Hamlet. So Shakespeare's Perchance to Dream, and Wonder Woman and Green Lantern battle a robot in Philadelphia at Independence Hall, representing the American dream. The Justice League all win, and they deactivate the devices saving the Earth. Pretty standard stuff. And if you want to notice, no Batman here. That's an interesting thing. This is an era, though, when the Justice League is like 15 people deep or something like that, where it gets ridiculous. Zatanna gets put over pretty big as a pretty big force on this team. Also noting that she's the newest recruit on the team. She's in a costume I've never seen before. I know like the one maybe after this, but this is before. And she's still got like the purple dress and the big white cape. This is before the kind of traditional magician's outfit and fishnets and top hat. But yeah, this is disappointing. I thought this was going to be more fun with Jerry Conway on there, but yeah, this was very, very odd and very, very hokey. I did not really enjoy this.
Yeah, I mean, Conway has a very long run. He also writes pretty much the entire Detroit League, which is after this. Like that starts like 50 issues after this. So similar to Carrie Bates' Flash, but maybe different. There are definitely distinct eras of this. But what I cannot say that for is Dick Dillon. And I'm going to be honest and kind of sound like an asshole that like this felt, and again, I didn't read every single book that all of us are talking about this week, but this issue felt the most dated to me. And it's pretty much entirely based on Dick Dillon's art. He's literally been drawing this book since like the 1960s, like 100 issues before this. And to make myself sound even kind of a bit more of a dick is that he only draws a couple more issues and then just like suddenly dies. I don't remember the exact situations. I always thought he was old because he had such a long run, but I just figured out that he died at 51, which is crazy. But yeah, and then the Zatanna costume, I just like, I don't know what it is. Like, obviously people, debate about her JLI era costume, which she eventually gets rid of and stuff like that. People make fun of that, but at least that it's like, okay, it's of the era and stuff like that. But this one is just funky. I don't like this costume at all. The art's just pretty generic and boring. This really feels like it could have came out in 1968 to me, to be honest, almost.
Yeah, I agree. It's was not great.
Yeah. And you're kind of, I'm not sure really when like the peak of satellite is. I think it's actually maybe there's like two peaks, because you have like the early peak when it's like first the Thing, and then you have slightly after this where Dick Dillon's gone and like George Perez is on there for like scattered dozen issues or so. So this was not.
League doesn't get good until JLI, because there's a lot of this era I just do not like.
Well, yeah, I think some of it's more dated than like, an Avengers book or something like that. It's harder to go back into retroactively.
All right. Marvel 2-in-1, number 61, written by Mark Grunwald with art by Jerry Bingham. This issue is collected in the Guardians of the Galaxy Tomorrow's Avengers Volume 2 trade paperback, or the omnibus of the same name. In this issue, we have the character Her emerging from a cocoon and flying off to see Alicia Masters, the Thing's girlfriend. Her explains that she needs Alicia to find him, otherwise known as Adam Warlock, eventually escaping and leaving the Thing to chase after them. In Central Park, Her explains that she is the perfect mate for Adam and needs Alicia's help to find him. The Thing ends up calling up the Avengers Tower for help when he is then visited by Starhawk, who is still on Earth with the rest of the Guardians of the Galaxy after the events of the Korvac saga. Back at Central Park, Moondragon shows up and informs her and Alicia that Adam Warlock perished in a battle with Thanos, referring to Marvel 2-in-1 Annual Number 2. Her decides that Moondragon and Alicia should come to Counter Earth with her to revive Warlock. Just as they are about to leave, Thing and Starhawk show up to try to stop them, and they are beaten soundly. This issue revolves around a lot of important storylines from this era and previously, so it is cool to see how all of these characters catch each other up on the most recent events, and how it progresses from there.
Yeah, I don't think either of us read it, but I'll just say, yeah, it's interesting, and it makes sense that this is part of a run by Mark Grunwald, and some of it also by Ralph Macchio on Marvel 2-in-1. And Marvel 2-in-1 and Marvel Team Up, it was often the case that you'd pick up from other storylines. But if you give this book to Mark Grunwald, obviously that's going to happen. So this is basically him doing his little side epilogue to all the Starlin stuff from the 70s and 80s. Now our final book, and we will finish strong with a book that only I read. And, you're going to have to put some work to find anyways. Micronauts number 15. This is also by Bill Mantlo. The art here is by Howard Chaykin. Obviously, this is licensed from a toy line, but fully integrated into the Marvel Universe, which is unlike G.I. Joe, Transformers, obviously Star Wars, Battlestar Galactica, etc., but also like ROM, which Bill Mantlo also wrote. And the first dozen issues are basically Michael Golden's only sustained run on a comic besides the Nom. And Golden is a hugely influential artist to a whole generation. Like, all of the Image founders would say that he's one of their top 3 guys. But I feel like he's mostly forgotten in an era where a lot of his work is either no longer considered relevant or it's hard to reprint. Who's reading back issues of the Nom nowadays? Even though that was a very relevant and acclaimed book in the era. And Howard Chaykin follows him in one of his few mainstream-ish stretches. And basically why I read this issue and why it's worth looking at potentially, especially with the Chaykin bit, is that there's a Fantastic Four guest appearance here. There's even a joke in the story about toys, and also there's a reference to how Captain Universe first appeared in this book by Mantlo and Golden. This actual story here, basically the Micronauts get caught in a tractor beam, they fight some aliens, their robot crewmate dies, but obviously it's not permanent. And then Psycho Man shows up, and he's here to fuck with them. And Psycho Man is one of these kind of microverse subspace villains. I mean, he's like the major one. And this is actually his first post-Lee and Kirby appearance, which I had no idea about, because this is years later. I figured he had to have shown up in other Fantastic Four issues. And I guess after this, he does continue to appear. And now he first appeared in Fantastic Four, but now he is fully a recurring Fantastic Four villain. There's also a SHIELD base in this issue called, it's an acronym, but it's HELL. And there's some kind of it's very strange. It's kind of like a Lazarus pit, but like a Lazarus pit connected to the microverse. It doesn't make sense to me. And the Human Torch goes to investigate that base while the rest of the Fantastic Four go into the microverse to figure out what's going on. And the actual meeting between the two teams is going to be in the next issue. So actually, the 2 Bill Mantlo issues that I read this week, both of them were kind of part 1 of a story, and the cool guest appearance in full and the team up and misunderstanding fight or whatever comes of it would be in the next issue, and that would be Hulk with Captain Marvel, and then over here with the Fantastic Four. But this was interesting. I mean, I mostly read it to see what Howard Chaykin was like, doing a sort of superhero book in this era. It doesn't look weird or anything. It's not like it looks like American Flag or Black Kiss. It's pretty standard. I mean, obviously he was drawing Star Wars not super long before this, and a few other bits and bobbles. And none of you guys read this. I wouldn't necessarily recommend to specifically back issue dive for Micronauts number 15, but Micronauts is kind of cool. I like Bug, and all the other characters have cool designs. So that's our show. Cover date of March 1980. I thought it was fun.
I was surprised that more books were like, I was really, really excited to read everything this week. And then I was like, maybe I got overexcited because there were more downers for me than things I enjoyed last week.
Well, I think we potentially accidentally, we picked a good selection for the most part because we were seeing some, we had, there's no number ones on our list, but we kind of had a first issue or two. We had a few key issues, the creative shifts and everything like that. And some of these books, like Justice League, principally felt very dated, and some of these books felt ahead of their time. Daredevil is in that kind of transitionary period. So
I felt like top to bottom, this was the best retro week we chose of the whole rundown. I thought it was the best amount of things to get a sample of the entire era.
Yeah, maybe representative. I would say, if you average the quality and how much I like the books, it's definitely not the best.
Yeah,
right?
That's a disappointing thing because I thought we had a great palette.
Yeah. Okay, my pick of the week, and this is actually somewhat hard for me, to be honest. I'm gonna give it to Batman.
Okay. I'm gonna go Flash.
That's probably my runner-up.
I'll do Iron Man.
Big surprise. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. We're probably doing the exact same thing next week. So stay tuned. Watch us next week. Catch up. Read more comics. Bye-bye.